subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, and leave your comment because you won't want to miss this story. It was just a joke, or at least that's what I thought. Mark was there, smiling, celebrating another year of life, and I made an offhand comment without thinking. But in that moment, something that seemed so harmless destroyed everything. The room went silent. Mark didn't react. He just turned away, and I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. A simple joke. Or maybe not so simple after all. Suddenly, the tension between us became palpable, and I realized that something much bigger was at play. I was about to discover that the joke wasn't what was really tearing us apart. The real bombshell was about to explode. Have you ever had that moment when, no matter how hard you tried, you just couldn't ignore the obvious? That feeling that the pain was there, underneath the surface, just waiting for an opportunity to reveal itself? Well, I was living that. Deep down, I knew there was something more that wasn't being said, something that had been buried for years. The truth? The betrayal wasn't in the words I said, but in what had been left unsaid for so long. The relationship I thought was solid was broken, and I was about to discover that in a way I never imagined. This isn't just a story of infidelity, it's a warning. A silent scream for everyone who hasn't yet realized what is crumbling around them. What I went through, you might be going through, or might be about to go through. So, don't miss what's coming next. Leave your comment and share this story. If you have doubts, if you feel that something is wrong in your life, it's time to hear what I have to say.
It was Mark's birthday.
I was trying to keep it light, trying to make a funny comment, but the truth is that the remark came out without a filter, like a sharp blade that I didn't realize until it was too late. I just wanted to make everyone laugh, but instead, I stopped the whole party. Mark, my husband, who until then seemed fine, stood up without saying a word. The weight of what I had said was in the air, and the worst part, he just turned his back and walked out. I stood there, motionless, unable to process what had just happened. The silence was deafening. The feeling of being in the center of a storm, not knowing how to react, took over me. I saw the glances, heard the muffled laughs, but none of that mattered anymore. What truly tormented me was what the situation represented. There was something there that I wasn't seeing, something much deeper that had hidden itself between the lines of what seemed like just a comment. I knew, in that moment, that words, even said without malice, could create a rift between two people who thought they were unbreakable. I wasn't just shocked by Mark's reaction, but by what it meant for both of us. Something inside me knew that this incident wouldn't just be a conversation later. That's in the past. I felt like I was touching an open wound, something that had been building up for a long time. And deep down, I already knew that my relationship with Mark was changing, and not in the way I had expected. The impact of a simple comment had somehow been devastating. But I didn't know how to turn back, how to bring back the lightness of that night, how to fix the damage of something I couldn't fully understand, no matter how hard I tried. That feeling of being lost in my own marriage, of seeing everything we built crumble in moments like this, made me question, what were we really living? What was happening to us? What was hidden behind those words, those actions? And more importantly, was it possible to fix all of this, or was it already too late? I felt like I was overwhelmed all the time. Every day felt like a juggling act. On one side, my career, which demanded so much of me. On the other, family life, which had no pause. Meanwhile, Mark seemed to have found the perfect balance. He was there always with the kids, like a dedicated father, receiving applause and praise. I kept wondering, When would I get time to be recognized for all my effort? The pressure didn't just come from work, but from the expectation of being the perfect wife, the perfect mother. Everything had to work. Everything had to be flawless. I felt invisible, and the worst part was that this wasn't something Mark noticed. He did things as if it were natural, as if it were easy. But in reality, I was sinking under the weight of what I wasn't saying, under the weight of being the only one carrying this load. It wasn't just about work or the kids. It was about the fact that I felt completely alone in this process. What I saw as a constant effort, he saw as something simple, like an everyday task. And with each passing day, that resentment grew, without him knowing, or worse, without him seeing. Maybe I started hiding in this sea of obligations and pressures. I didn't speak. I didn't complain. The pride of not wanting to seem weak stopped me from telling Mark how suffocated I felt. But what he didn't understand was that, over time, every little thing he did, every compliment he got for being the present father, just made my burden heavier. Every smile of his, every greeting, just made me feel more distant from who I truly wanted to be, a woman who felt like her struggle was worth something. I realized how much things were changing, but I didn't know how to tell him. And like a snowball, what started as a small frustration turned into a monster. I couldn't bear the weight of carrying all this alone anymore, and with each passing day, he seemed further away. And it was then that I realized that the lack of communication, the lack of sharing, was eating away at everything I thought was solid. That silence, which had built up between us over the years, was now becoming the wall I no longer knew how to break. I was 26 years old when I met Mark, and everything seemed so simple, so natural. We were both young, with big dreams, full of hope and promises about the future. When I found out I was pregnant, I felt the ground slip away beneath my feet. It wasn't planned, but Mark, with the same confidence he always had when he looked at me, assured me that we would be in this together, that he would be an equal partner, and together we would face everything. I believed him, of course, because back then everything seemed possible. No matter what came our way, we would be ready for any challenge. The pregnancy was a whirlwind, but more than that, it was his promise that made me believe we would have a balanced life, a solid family. But reality soon showed that life is not as simple as we imagine at 26. The days began to feel long, and the nights endless. I found myself trapped in an exhausting routine of work, household responsibilities, and the pressure of being a good mother, a good wife. And Mark? He always seemed so calm, so present, as if nothing bothered him. He seemed so capable of balancing all his responsibilities, while I, little by little, felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I began to wonder where the equal partner he promised me was. I was alone in a silent struggle, trying to keep everything working, trying to be the woman he expected and that I wanted to be, but without enough support. What started as a partnership turned into an unbalanced game, where I was the only one carrying the load. I needed more than promises. I needed action, someone by my side to share the weight, and that, unfortunately, was not happening. Mark was there, but in a distant way, as if he had already achieved what he wanted, and I was being left behind. I started to realize that what seemed like a dream of a perfect future had turned into a silent nightmare. I was lost, trying to balance all my responsibilities while Mark seemed to move forward effortlessly. What I didn't know was that this distance, this disconnection, was beginning to create cracks in our relationship, cracks that would not be so easy to repair. Every day, every moment, seemed to push me further away from who I wanted to be and from who I expected Mark to be. And over time, I realized that the promises of an equal partner had been lost amidst so many pressures. Being a mother and a professional was something I never knew would be so hard until I found myself at the center of this equation. I felt like I was being torn into 1,000 pieces, trying to be everything to everyone, and yet, no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. At work, no one recognized what I did. The extra effort, the tireless dedication, seemed invisible to everyone, while Mark received constant praise for simply being present in the kids' lives. What he did, what seemed so simple, to me was the bare minimum. But society, and even he, treated it as though it was an extraordinary feat. I felt as if the burden I carried had no value. I was there, working nonstop, juggling all my responsibilities, but what did I get in return? The impression that I was just playing my part, while he was the star of the family. When Mark took the kids to the park or did something any normal father would do, everyone applauded him, as if he were doing something beyond the expected. I was tired of not being seen, tired of being the mother who stays in the background. I wanted more, needed more recognition, but he didn't see that, didn't understand how suffocating it was for me. More and more, the frustration grew. I saw myself sacrificing so much, but it never seemed to be enough. I gave my best at work and at home, but the recognition I received was minimal compared to Mark Shine. He did the basics and was celebrated for it, while I sank under the overload. This discrepancy between expectations and reality was destroying me inside, and there was no room to vent. I couldn't talk, couldn't express how much it was affecting me because he seemed content with how things were. And that only made it harder to bear. But deep down, I knew something had to change. The feeling of being left behind, of my effort being wasted, was eating me up. I could no longer pretend everything was fine, that things were normal just because he seemed to be playing his role as a father. I was exhausted emotionally and physically. The weight of being the invisible woman, the one who does everything without being noticed, became unbearable. I felt like I was about to explode, and I knew that to change this, it would take more than words. I needed actions, true understanding, but would Mark see that before it was too late? I never imagined that a simple comment, something so small, could mess with everything. But the truth is, in a moment of loss of control, words can be sharper than we think. It was Mark's birthday, and he simply didn't tell me about the plans he had. I thought he had somehow forgotten, or worse, that I wasn't important enough to be included. And then he said that phrase, something so banal, but that seemed to be the last straw. Something like, "Oh, the party is just for friends, no need to worry." The casual tone in which he said it hit me hard. I was speechless, but with my heart heavy. I looked at him, trying to understand if that was really what he thought, or if he was just trying to deflect attention from something deeper. But at that moment, all the frustration that had been building up, all the feelings of neglect, and everything I hadn't said, exploded inside me. That conversation, which was supposed to be about a simple birthday plan, turned into something much bigger. The words started flowing, the criticisms came out, and nothing seemed to fit anymore. I could no longer communicate with Mark in a healthy way. Every word turned into a confrontation, and I felt like I was fighting alone, without a real partner by my side. The tension between us grew every day. I started to wonder if we could really save what we had, or if it was already irreparably broken. The conversations became shorter and sharper. The jokes that used to make us laugh turned into disguised insults. Mark seemed more and more distant, as if the only thing he wanted was to avoid conflicts. And me? I was desperate, trying to make him understand, trying to get to some place of understanding, but he just pulled further away. The silence at the end of our conversations became heavier and heavier, and I knew we were heading towards something I feared: separation. I tried to resist, tried to save what was happening, but the words and the distance began to define what we had. It wasn't just about the birthday, it wasn't just about that specific comment. It was about everything I had been holding inside, everything Mark couldn't see, everything I could no longer ignore. We had reached a point where the disconnection was palpable, and the idea of staying together seemed more and more impossible. And yet, I still wondered, was there any chance of going back to what we were? Or maybe, finally, it was time to face the truth? It was 3 months of silence, physical and emotional separation, and as I looked at everything that had happened, I realized I was trapped in a web of misunderstandings and unmet expectations. What seemed like a simple marriage crisis was actually the culmination of years of unspoken words, neglected moments, and hidden dreams and frustrations. Every little misunderstanding, every unshed tear, had accumulated into something bigger than either of us had imagined. We had reached a point where the connection seemed completely lost, and I began to question everything I believed to be the foundation of our relationship. While we stayed apart, I had time to reflect. Every lonely night, every silence between us, made me realize how much we had failed to communicate. Mark and I were no longer speaking the same language. Conversations about the future, about the children, about our feelings, had turned into monologues, where I spoke and he just listened, or worse, ignored. I found myself, without realizing, expecting something from him that I had never clearly expressed. He, too, was probably expecting something from me, something I never knew he needed. There was a lack of understanding, a bridge between our worlds that we had never been able to build. When I finally realized everything that was at stake, I understood that separation, although painful, could be a blessing in disguise. Maybe it was time to stop, look back, and understand what we really were and who we really were. Maybe this was the chance we needed to start over, to reset everything. Of course, it was hard, the pain was real, but the idea of starting fresh with a more solid foundation, where communication flaws could be fixed, gave me a hope I hadn't had in a long time. Maybe this time apart was the only thing missing for both of us to grow, for us to understand that we were more than just the roles we played in each other's lives. That period of separation made me wonder if I really wanted to continue in a relationship where so many things were left unsaid, or if it would be better to go down separate paths, where we could both finally be honest about who we were and what we wanted. This process wasn't easy, but maybe it was necessary. What remained now was to face what was to come, knowing that the truth, no matter how painful, could be the key to rebuilding, whether together or apart. What I didn't know was whether I was ready to open that door, but life seemed to be forcing me to do just that. I was in the middle of an emotional storm, not knowing exactly where I was heading. The future seemed cloudy, full of uncertainties, and what terrified me the most was the unknown. So many unanswered questions hung in the air, and the emptiness that had formed between Mark and me seemed deeper than I was willing to admit. But as much as the fear of what came next paralyzed me, there was something inside me that began to awaken. Something that told me that this moment of uncertainty could, in fact, be an opportunity. Maybe it was what I needed to better understand who I was, away from the expectations that life and marriage had imposed on me. During this time away from Mark, I started asking myself, what do I really want for my life? It wasn't an easy question to answer, because for so many years I had lived for others, for family, for work, and even for the marriage. I had become a version of myself that believed I was fulfilling a role without truly living the life I desired. The separation, although painful, brought an unexpected clarity. I knew I needed to understand who I truly was, without the labels of wife, mother, or professional. I needed time to reconnect with myself, to discover what was important to me and what I truly needed from a partner. This period of reflection also made me realize that I could no longer depend on Mark to complete the parts of me that were incomplete. I needed to be whole for myself so that whatever the future held, it would be a conscious choice, not an escape from my own pain. Mark was important, of course, but I could no longer put all my hopes in something that wasn't working anymore. And maybe, if one day we crossed paths again, it would only happen if I were truly whole and able to communicate honestly and directly. Maybe the future I feared was, in fact, the opportunity one needed to create a new version of myself, stronger and more authentic. The uncertainty that once paralyzed me began to transform into something more powerful. The fear of the unknown turned into a genuine curiosity about what was to come. And deep down, I started to realize that perhaps the true journey was to find myself first. Only then, who knows, would I be ready to understand if Mark would still be part of that path, or if my future would unfold differently. Time would tell, but one thing I knew, I could no longer live to please others. I needed to live for myself, and maybe that was the first step in finding happiness again. Now that you've heard this story, I ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you see the signs? Can you tell when a small flaw turns into something irreparable? Sometimes, it's easy to deceive ourselves, thinking everything is fine when, in reality, we're on the brink of collapse. But what I learned from all of this is that nothing in life happens by chance. Every word, every gesture, every silence, everything carries weight. And often, the most painful truths come in the form of a simple joke or an unspoken lie. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned here? Will you continue ignoring the signs, or will you face the truth? You have the power to change your story before it becomes a joke that destroys everything around you. If you identified with something you heard here, share your experience in the comments. And if you want to continue learning how to deal with these situations in a way that brings truth and healing, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next chapter of this journey.